Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopijana Ballabha Giri Bharadhari. Jashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana. Jamunatira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Ashtotara Shatashishimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Grantharaj Shimam Bhagavatam Ki Nitai Gaura Premanandi. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to Shishiguru and Shigauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, the Summon Bonon, Chapter 84, the Sages' Teachings at Kurukshetra, Text 14 through 17. Text number 14. Sri Sukha Uvacha Nisamyetam Bhagavata Krishnaya Kuntamedasa Vachoduram Vajam Vipras Tushnin Asan Brahmadiya. Sri Sukha Uvacha Nisamyetam Bhagavata Krishnasya Kuntamedasa Vachoduram Vajam Vipras Tushnin Ashan Brahmadijat. Sri Sukha Uvacha Nishamyetam Bhagavata Krishnasya Kuntamedasa Vachoduram Vajam Vipras Tushnin Asham Brahmadiya. Please chant. Go ahead, Krishna Arjun. Sri Sukha Uvacha Nishamyetam Bhagavata Krishnasya Kuntamedasa Vachoduram Vajamri Pras Tushnin Asham Brahmadiya Sri Sukauvacha Nisanyetam Bhagavata Krishnasya Kuntamedasa Vachoduram Vajamri Pras Tustim Asam Brahmadiya Sri Sukauvacha Sukadev Goswami said, Nishamya, hearing, itam, such, Bhagavataha, of the Supreme Lord, Krishnasya, Krishna, Akuntha, unrestricted, Medasaha, whose wisdom, Vachaha, the words, Durambhayam, difficult to comprehend, Vipraha, the learned brahmanas, tushning, silent, asan, where, brahmat, unsteady, diyaha, their minds. Translation by the disciples of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Sukadev Goswami said, hearing such unfathomable words from the unlimitedly wise Lord Krishna, the learned Brahmanas remain silent, their minds bewildered. Text number 15. Chidambi Mrishyamuna Ishwarasya Shita Vyatam Jana Sangraha Ityuchu Smayantam Stam Jagat Gurun. Translation and purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. For some time, the sages pondered the Supreme Soul's behavior, which resembled that of a subordinate living being. They concluded that he was acting this way to instruct the people in general. Thus, they smiled and spoke to him, the spiritual master of the universe. Purport. Srila Sridhar Swami explained the word Ishita Vyata as referring to one's not being a controller, or, in other words, to being under the law of karma, obliged to work and experience the results of one's work. While addressing the sages, Lord Krishna accepted the role of a subordinate living being to emphasize the importance of hearing and serving saintly Vaishnavas. The personality of Godhead is also the supreme teacher of spiritual surrender. Text number 16. I read the translation. The great sages said, your power of illusion has totally bewildered us, the most exalted knowers of the truth and leaders among the universal creators. Ah, how amazing is the behavior of the Supreme Lord. He covers himself with his human-like activities and pretends to be subject to superior control. Purport. The sages have characterized the Lord's statement as inscrutable, duram bhajam. How this is so stated here, his words and activities bewilder even the most learned when he plays at subordinating himself to his own servants. And text number 17, translation. Indeed, the human-like pastimes of the Almighty are simply a pretense. Effortlessly, He alone sends forth from His self this variegated creation, maintains it, and then swallows it up again, all without becoming entangled, just as the elements, just as the element earth takes on many names and forms in its various transformations. Purport. The Supreme One, the One Supreme expands Himself as many without diminishing His completeness. He does this effortlessly, without depending on anyone or anything else. This mystic process of the Lord's self-expansion is incomprehensible to all but Himself. But the example of the substance earth and its and its manifold products bears enough resemblance to provide some idea. The same example is also presented in an often cited passage of the Chandogya Upanishad 6.1. Baram Bacharam Bhanam Bhikaro Namadhejam Mriti Keti Eva Shatyam. Quote, Earth transformations are merely verbal creations of the process of naming. The substance earth itself is alone real. Srila Sridhar Swami suggests that this verse of Srimad Bhagavatam answers a possible objection on the part of Lord Krishna. Quote, how can I create, maintain, and destroy the universe if I am Vasudeva's son? End of quote. The answer is given by the words, Aho Vimunas Charitam Vidam Badam Banam. Quote, you are the perfectly complete whole, and your birth and pastimes are only an imitation of ordinary persons' activities in the material world. You simply pretend to be under higher control. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Militam Yena Tasmai Sri Guruve Namaha. Namaham Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Romapada Swami. Namaham Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirveshesha Shunyavadi Pashatya Deshatarine Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, Srila Sukadev Goswami narrates to Maharaj Parikshit this encounter that happens in Kurukshetra, in which the whole great community of leaders are coming to Kurukshetra at the time of the solar eclipse to perform some sacrifice. Because of the auspiciousness of the place and the circumstance, then this was something that is done from time immemorial in this place of Kurukshetra. So you have the gatherings of the great kings and leaders, and also now the great sages are arriving. And the narrations of the interactions of the sages and the kings, and specifically here, the connection with Krishna, who is at the center of all these activities that are happening. Specifically, Srila Sukadeva Goswami narrates the connections that are there with those who are Krishna's devotees. The Brijavasis in relationship with Krishna, and then the different pious kings headed by the Pandavas and the Yadavas in relationship with Krishna, and now the sages in relationship with Krishna. So as the sages arrive, then as the heads of the Yadus and the center personality, Krishna speaks and addresses the sages. And he addresses sages in such a way that he places himself in a subordinated position. That's what the narration is telling us. And what Srila Sukadeva Goswami is highlighting, what he's highlighting is how the sages are processing this encounter with Lord Krishna directly. Now, they came to that, it is explained in the narration that the main purpose that they were coming to Kurukshetra was to take the opportunity to meet Krishna in person. So they come in understanding of Krishna's position. They're saintly devotees. They're Vaishnava sages who have perfect understanding of Krishna's position. And they come in from that purpose to actually being able to associate with Krishna directly. And then as they come in Krishna's presence, then Krishna addressed them in this way, in which he placed himself in a subordinate position. And Srila Sukadeva Goswami now is highlighting how bewildering this is for the sages. And the past, you can place yourself in that position that they are devotees who worship the Lord in awe and reverence. They're devotees who have a very close understanding of both the Brahman feature and the Paramatma feature of the Lord. And naturally, having that connection with the Lord within the heart, they worship the Lord in awe and reverence as the supreme controller, Paramatma, supreme soul, super soul. And a supreme controller who is with perfect knowledge, they explain that here is a supreme being who is the source of everything. From him, all this cosmic manifestation expands. It is him alone who is maintaining. And it is him who actually withdraw the whole cosmic manifestation. So they have perfect understanding of this. They have an understanding of the Supreme Lord as the Jamadhyasya, the source, the creator. They have an understanding of the Supreme Lord as the supremely independent and all cognizant. And in that position, to have that supreme being acting like an ordinary human being and placing himself in a subordinate position, then the sages is a confusing space. The word that is used um, is that is something that it doesn't match the reality that they understand, the truth that they understand, the absolute truth is inconceivable. It doesn't match, and it was bewildering. But immediately, through transcendental knowledge, they understand. Oh, he is he is doing that for the benefit of mankind. He is doing that to instruct how to properly act. And that's a very important understanding um, to receive and to embrace and to act in transcendental knowledge. In fact, that's at the heart of transcendental knowledge. And in the Bhagavad Gita, this is revealed in a very accessible and relatable way for mankind, especially in Kali Yuga. The Bhagavad Gita is tailor made transcendental knowledge for the Kali Yuga man or the Kali Yuga people. So it presents a system in which all these truths are fully revealed, and this seemingly confusing truth are actually very, very clearly explained in a way that we can understand. Without entrance into the Bhagavad Gita and within the system that Krishna has given for understanding transcendental truth, then it will be impossible, even to highly educated and qualified people. It becomes impossible to understand. The sages are Vaishnavas, and they could understand. Why they could understand? Because of their devotion to the Lord. They're connected in devotion, and they could understand what the reality is. So in the Bhagavad Gita, this is so wonderfully presented by Krishna. And Krishna actually, through the revelation of this truth, he also brings to Arjuna and explains these different levels of understanding, of connecting to him. He explained that to understand him is very rare. What is it? Manushanan Sahasrisu, out of thousands of men that may endeavor for perfection, hardly once, and not, hardly once really reach that perfection. And on the many that reach that perfection, hardly one knows is in truth. So this truth of Krishna is something that he refers as Guhya Taman. It's the most confidential knowledge. Guhyatamam. So it's very confidential. Prabhupada explains, or our Acharyas explains, that there's these different levels of confidentiality. The first confidential, or the confidential knowledge, Guhya, means that knowledge about our spiritual nature, knowledge of Aham Brahmasmi, I am a spirit. Guhyataram, which is more confidential, is knowledge of the supreme controller within the heart, Paramatma. And Guhyatamam, the most confidential knowledge, is knowledge about Krishna, the Swayam Bhagavan Krishna, the origin of everything, and the connection that we have with Krishna, that intimate connection. So it's also very wonderful that when you receive this most confidential knowledge, you can understand this simultaneous oneness and difference, which is key to be able to really enter into the most confidential knowledge. Krishna, when he is revealing to Arjuna in chapter 9, which is entitled The Most Confidential Knowledge, which is about the intimate, loving connection with Krishna, directly with Krishna. He starts by saying, by giving the understanding that here he is, again, the creator, the maintainer, and annihilator of everything. Everything that exists emanates from him. And then he draws this seemingly very inconceivable understanding that although everything is emanating from him and everything is in him, he is not in them. So there's this explanation about him being a transcendental source that is the cause of everything, the supreme controller. That is, there's no truth beyond him. So this is established throughout the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna's position as a supreme. And then he started to explain to Arjuna about that intimate relationship that gets established when one makes the connection with Krishna personally, Krishna himself. And it's something quite fascinating with also we go and study the 18th chapter, which is the concluding chapter. And in the last verses of the concluding chapter, Krishna again touches on this Guhyataram and Guhyatamam principle. And there's some subtle distinctions that the Acharyas point out in Krishna's language when he is present this to Arjuna. I read it for you because it's always it's quite beautiful. Um, so at the end, you know that the last instruction of Krishna is text number 66, Sarvadharman Parityaja. That's Krishna's last instruction, in which everything is summarized. The whole teachings of the Bhagavad Gita is summarized in this verse. Sarvadharman Parityaya. That's the conclusion. That's Krishna's system. You simply surrender exclusively to his instructions, to the system that he's laid out for us in the Bhagavad Gita. You don't need to pay attention to any of the other things that are recommended in the Vedas. All these different types of principles, religious principles, that are secondary to this supreme principle. So you simply accept that. You don't have to worry about anything else. No fears, no worries, no anxieties. So, in the previous verses, 66 is the last one. In verse number 60, Krishna explains to Arjuna about, 61, he tells Arjuna about the super soul. He tells Arjuna that the Supreme Lord is situated in everyone's heart. Ishvara Sarvabhutanam Hrideshe Arjuna Tistati. So, the Lord is situated in everyone's heart, directing all the wanderings of all living beings who are seated in a machine made of material energy. So, the presence of the super soul, the Lord. Now, what the acharyas are pointing out is that Krishna is referring to the super soul as a third person, as him. It becomes more clear in the next verse when, after telling this, text 62, Krishna tells Arjuna, O son of Bharata, surrender unto him utterly. By his grace, you will attain transcendental peace and the supreme and eternal abode. So, Krishna is referring to the super soul as separate to him, as someone else, him. Surrender to him. Surrender to him. But then, as he continues, he switches to me. So, verse 63, referring to the super soul, him, he says to Arjuna, I have explained to you knowledge that is still more confidential. So this is the Guhyataram, more confidential. Deliberate on it, on this fully, and then do what you wish to do. But now, in verse 64, he introduces something that is more difficult to obtain, something that is most confidential. And then he refers as me. Krishna, the person, the Swayam Bhagavan Krishna who was standing before Arjuna in his human-like form, is telling Arjuna something that is most confidential. So he says, because, and here's the qualification, how the entrance to this most confidential space, what are the requirements? Because you're my dear friend, I am speaking to you my supreme instruction, the most confidential knowledge of all. Hear this from me, for it is for your benefit. So the words that he used again is guhyatamam and paramam bachaha, my supreme instruction. So this is the instruction that supersedes that is supreme of all other instructions, that is previous to the verse Sarva Dharman Parityaja. So there is two instructions that summarize this space of acting within this most confidential knowledge. The Sarva Dharman Parityaja verse and the previous verse, number 65, which reads, which is a famous Manmana, Manmana Babamat Bhakto Majjajiman Namaskuru Man Evaishashi Sarvante Satyamte Pratijani Priyosime. So, these two verses, always think of me. Now, see how Krishna, now he's not referring at him, the super soul, he's referring at me, Krishna. So tells Arjuna, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, and offer your homage unto me, thus you will come to me without fault. I promise you this because you are my dear friend. And then Sarvadharman Parityaja. So the sages, when they see Krishna acting in a human-like form, is confusing because in this most confidential knowledge, there is something that gives entrance to an intimate relationship, loving relationship with Krishna that start to supersede awe and reverence and becomes, friendship and becomes parental and becomes conjugal. And this type of confidential relationship finds its supreme space in Goloka Vrindavan. And so, by Krishna's mercy, in his most magnanimous manifestation of Lord Chaitanya, we give an entrance to the space of Goloka Vrindavan to worship Krishna in the confidential manner of the devotees in Vrindavan. And specifically, we're guided by Lord Chaitanya to follow in the footsteps of the gopis, which are the most, among all the most confidential devotees, they're the top, they're the highest. Brajabadu, the damsels of Vrindavan, are the highest form of worship. So, for the sages to being experience and seeing Krishna's human life form and his activities as an ordinary human is something that was bewildering. And although they're able to understand, oh, the Lord is instructing, the Lord is instructing, and that is the case, but also even more difficult to understand is the position when Krishna not only act according to religious principles that govern human society, but when he enters into these most intimate connections with his intimate devotees in Vrindavan. And so we see how even Lord Brahma becomes bewildered when he sees, is my supreme Lord who is sitting there like an ordinary child, just playing games with his friends and eating, from each other's hands, just yogurt and sweets and different things? can he be Lord Narayan? Let me test. So he was bewildered. Muhyanti Yatsurayata. Srila Vyasadeva said in the beginning of the Bhagavatam, even the great sages becomes bewildered by Krishna. Muhyanti Yatsurayata. So it just highlight Krishna's greatness. The sages arrived just as the narration was there on the previous chapter of just appreciating, by Srimati Draupadi, appreciating the love of the queens of Dwarka for Krishna. So, so now the sages arrive and they just appreciating Krishna's um, acting in certain way. We also heard the same thing when Narada also was visiting Krishna's different palaces some chapters ago. And he had the same reaction. He was bewildered because there is Krishna worshiping him, washing his feet. And he is the Lord of, he understands this is my Lord, Lord Narayan. But he's worshiping me, but I'm his servant. And that's very awkward and bewildering. But then, as a devotee, he accepts as a matter of service and um, and able to understand that this is the Lord's desire and this is for instructing people how to properly honor and worship Vaishnava devotee. So a similar situation is here. And we are just to hear now the appreciation and and the instructions of the sages that are given for all the kings and also in line from the Lord's desire to instruct the world of how to properly act according to religious principles. Any comments or questions? Yes, Carl. Let's wait for the microphone, Carl. So people here in the internet.
Is the whole thing of what do you call it? Krishna serving his servant equivalent to Jesus serving his servant?
Serving the servant according to what?
Is the whole situation similar to how they say Jesus was serving his servant? It's kind of
Yeah,
like
it could be
similar.
like that. Yeah. In general, um, the mood of the devotee is always to serve. And even the spiritual master is constantly making arrangements to help and serve those who are under him or under his care or her care to grow in Krishna consciousness. So it's like parents too. Parents are constantly serving the child to provide for to facilitate healthy growth. So it's a similar thing. Is is the natural care that is there because there is this unconditional love that governs the whole relationship between Krishna and Krishna's devotees. So, so the same thing manifests with Krishna's representative, the representative of Krishna, also try to distribute that unconditional love that comes from Krishna. And they do it in such a way. So it's always there. Thank you. Krishna Archana, you have something?
You made the connection with the Bhagavad Gita verse in the 18th chapter of Krishna directing persons to think of him. And the sages, it seems like almost a stimulus for the sages to think of Krishna when they actually have him performing service to them, meaning that it allows for even deeper reflection of what Krishna's actual position is, hence their reflection. Oh, he's actually, his human-like activities are a pretense. He's actually, creates the whole universe and can withdraw it and remain untouched. So the thinking of Krishna or following that instruction seems to be very much interconnected to uh, hearing about his particular kind acts or acts of service to his devotees. It seems it enhances the being able to think of him. So I'm just reflecting.
Yeah, it makes it's very endearing, that he is something that is beyond our reach. And there he is. Not just, it just is a natural thing. It's very endearing. When Krishna tells Arjuna, um, you know, I'm giving you this because you're my friend. To have someone so great telling you, treating you on a one-to-one, then is very endearing, and enhances that loving connection, and which is really what Krishna is looking from all his devotees at the end, is that loving connection that is not hampered by anything, including awe and reverence. So the sages are having those moments are given the opportunity to go into a higher connection with Krishna that is beyond awe and reverence, that is now like, he is connecting with me in that intimate level, on the level of service. And it's not easy to understand to regular people if you don't have access to this transcendental knowledge. So therefore, the impersonal stuff is very easy. It's a very easy way to approach the absolute truth. It's much easier in terms of a conditioned soul. But to understand that absolute truth as a person with actual qualities and with actual connections is much more difficult. And what to speak of a cowherd boy, it's even more difficult. So, but yeah, I think it allows the sages to go even into a higher experience of connection with Krishna, you know. So it's quite quite beautiful. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.